This is the Books Podcast presented by Tim Hague.
The mainstream is dominated by comics, film and television. Because there are certain things that work in comics that don't work in film and television.
I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, is this the kind of book you'd like your wives and servants to read?
Joel Meadows is editor-in-chief of Tripwire magazine. Now, I'm a fairly recent convert to Tripwire, but it celebrates its 30th anniversary this year. Joel, thank you for joining us on Books Podcast.
It's my pleasure.
So, the book is this rather handsome volume, teasingly entitled Tripwire 30. We'd probably better start out with you telling us what Tripwire is.
Well, it started life as a fanzine with an ex-neighbour of mine, and it used to have comics and music. And it was very, very primitive. It was a stapled A4 fanzine. But Tripwire started properly at the end of February of 92 because we bemoaned the fact there wasn't really a decent comic magazine or comics and music, and then it became comics and film and TV.
Well, there was Comics Journal back then, wasn't there?
And there was Comics International, which was a good news magazine. And also there was Speakeasy prior to that. Speakeasy, which was, your listeners probably don't remember it because they're probably too young or it might be lost in the mist of time, but Speakeasy was a magazine about comics, which used to have a column from Grant Morrison and a thing called Drivel, which was written by him.
For you and me, Grant Morrison is a name. I'll bet you a lot of our listeners don't know that name. And actually, we'll come back to that because that's, the luminaries are quite niche. But I want to stick with this. You were like 19.
I was 19. The first issue of the magazine came out on the weekend of the end of February 1992. And it was the same weekend that Vertigo had a London launch in a restaurant.
Vertigo, you need to explain. It was a DC.
I will. Vertigo was a DC imprint,
yeah.
Which was designed for mature readers. So it's where Sandman started. Alan Moore's Swamp Thing started there.
So instead of spandex superheroes for kids, it was aimed at a slightly more sophisticated.
Yes,
audience.
and the other thing is it had a lot of British creators, people like Pete Milligan, the aforementioned Grant Morrison, Alan Moore, a whole range of people who'd go on to have a big career in comics. Now,
you're giving us a bit of a background.
Yes.
But I want to know, what is its focus now? Tripwire. What is its
raison d'etre?
Well, yeah, okay. Raison
or
d'etre.
remit, or either remit.
Well,
I guess we cover comics, film, and TV, but also we do cover illustration and art. And so we have the website, which we update pretty regularly. And we also have the magazine, which is once a year, but there are plans afoot.
Yeah, because there was a time it went online a couple of times.
2011 was our last print magazine, but in 2020, I missed doing print editions. So we've done 2 print editions. We're about to do a third. There's something I come from print. I've always worked in print. And I love having a physical object in my hands, and so this was, we've been working on this book for about 18 months. So this was another kind of another print object, another physical object for people to get and for me to work on.
And of course, it's not a magazine; it's a book.
Yes.
So let's talk about what's in it. It's a 30th anniversary.
Yes.
Is it articles off the web, of the sort of online version, or is it newly commissioned material?
It's a mix. So there's a feature which takes excerpts from interviews over the years, both on the website and also in the magazine. The Vertigo piece you mentioned was newly commissioned for it. There's a 30 years of Image, because Image launched the same year that we did. So we thought it was quite a milestone because Image is a big company, independent comic company,
is a comic
which publishes Walking Dead
and Saga.
And
like that, yeah.
And they're a big company, and they were set up by people who left Marvel to set up on their own. And it's The Walking Dead, which people know from the TV show. Without that comic series, this company would not still exist. It's thanks partly to one guy called Eric Stevenson, who's kind of like their publisher now. So you've got that. You've got a feature of my photographs of various comics and genre people in there, which wasn't commissioned for the book, but they've never been assembled quite in this way. There's a piece about Marvel movies, which I wrote, because the last 30 years, what's interesting is if you go back 30 years, in 1992, you had nothing. The first Marvel movie was Blade in 1998, and then it snowballed, and in 2008 you had Iron Man, but it's looking at this thing that didn't exist when we started. and it's trying to reflect the changes in the industry as well as the changes in us.
Well, the
over
Marvel
last 30
Cinematic
years.
Universe must have changed everything from the point of view
Oh, it
of
has.
the focus
Totally.
of this genre. I imagine that before the films were made, most people wouldn't have known all the characters that
No.
they're at your fingertips.
No,
But
definitely.
the MCU has just brought them in mainstream.
Yes, it has.
How's that affected the magazine? Because it was, I want to say niche. That sounds a little insult. Geeky. That's what it was.
Yes.
It was geeky, and
Well, I guess
now it's less so. You've got
Yes.
like a long good piece about like the 30 best comic book film adaptations.
Yes, we have, and also comic, film, and TV. We got a section on comic television of the last 30 years, also in the book. So it has broadened out the appeal of all these things, and it has made them mainstream. I mean, the mainstream is dominated now by comics, film, and television. It's insane if you think about it. How much of this is out there, and and it wasn't in '92. It's pre-internet days. One of the very first interviews I did with, well, your listeners may not know who he is, but Scottish comic artist Frank Quitely, who's now quite a big name. The interview I did with him, I did it via the post. So I sent him questions. I literally wrote them to him and stuck them in the mail. So we got that, the strip. So it's a mix of reprints and new material. So the Sherlock Holmes strip at the back, there were 3 shorts, and one of them debuted in the book.
Well, of course, Tripwire does give you the freedom to go in all of these directions. Tripwire is obsessed with comic book images, and you'd think that any comic magazine would be, but your magazine is absolutely in love with them. You have images just for their own sake. I mean, in fact, one of your contributors says. Let's see. Tripwire seems to exist solely to point out the beauty of art.
Oh, that was Dirk who wrote the introduction.
Which
yes.
is, of course, it's a justification for print.
Yes.
I always think online, if beautiful images can seem ephemeral, but you want them fixed there.
Well, I'd like to, because the thing is, I talked to a guy who used to work for Titan who came by the show, and we talked about the idea of a coffee table book. And you can get digital versions of these, but it's not the same.
No, it's not.
If you want a coffee table book, so you want an art book, or you want a photography book, because as you know, that photography is something that interests me, and you can have them online, you can have a PDF, but it's not the same, as having an object in your hands. There is something about that. And the other thing, obviously, in the book is there's, it's peppered with loads of really nice, cool comic and illustrative images.
You've got art by
because I wanted to break it up, because I didn't want it just to be a textbook. I wanted to have a book that had an illustrative purpose to it.
And the design is
Thank you.
absolutely beautiful.
So
but yes, you've got a sort of whole page illustrations by, big names.
we've
like
got Bill
Bill
Sienkiewicz, Frank Miller,
Frank-
Drew
yeah,
Struzan,
exactly.
Jock. We've got a range of...
Did you? Is that stuff that they've handed out? Did you get it specifically? Was it commissioned for?
No, not all of it was.
Tripwire?
Not most of it wasn't exclusive, but I guess it's exclusive to this context or something you could say. But it's still nice to have, because these are pieces that people might not have seen, because some of them are commissions that they did for other people. And I just wanted to mix it up. We did it with our 21st anniversary book. I just think it's nice to have images
It really
to
is,
kind of
because
break
every
up
so
the
often
feature.
you'll
You go
finish an
a
article
and you go, oh look, there's a couple of
and you
nice.
turn
Yes,
over,
exactly.
and there's something just ravishing.
So it's kind of like a
on the
palate
next
cleanser,
page.
if you like,
Yeah.
for the reader to go, I've just read, like a chunky 8-page feature on this, and you turn over and you go, wow, there's a really nice image from. And the other thing with that is that from a practical level, when we did our crowdfunding thing, we offered some of these as limited edition prints, which was nice, and having them in the book. So there's a connection there between that and being able to offer limited prints. So that was a kind of practical consideration for something like that.
Let's talk about one of the other articles you have in the book. You've got you love lists. I love,
yes.
you like
Well,
the
they're a
30
little bit clickbaity, like having the web, but I'm hoping they're a little bit more fun than they are on the web.
And then you get a paragraph. If it's the 30 comic book adaptations
Yes.
of movies, then you'll get a couple of paragraphs on each one of
Yes.
them. You've got 30 graphic novels that you should know.
Yes.
And graphic novels have got a lot more respectable.
Well, yeah, certainly the last 30 years, I mean, they were just collections. I mean, they were around, but they were literally just collections of comics.
Well, I noticed that in the top 3, one of them is still a collection of comics. It's the Nick Fury.
Yes. Oh, the
Agents of
Steranko,
S.H.I.E.L.D.
yes.
The
Yes.
Steranko.
Yes.
Interestingly, the number 1 in your list is Posey Simmons,
Yes.
Gemma Bovary,
Yes.
which It's not a superhero. It's
No.
not a Marvel or DC.
No.
But that makes your number one on your list of best graphic novels.
Well, I wanted it to be a diverse mix. I wanted it to be a range of different things because you've got everything. You've got Batman books. You've got Akira. You've got Lone Wolf and Cub. You've got the Darwin Cook oversized hardcovers. As you say, you've also got Gemma Bovary. I didn't want it to be kind of monolithic list of here's a list of the usual suspects. Here's your Watchmen and your Dark Knight, and I mean obviously there is Batman Year One in there.
Yeah, and Watchmen is in there, of course, because
yes.
It's one of the best.
Watchmen isn't in there.
Is it not?
No, no, it isn't.
It must have. I've been looking at the film.
I mean, I have to be honest that the 30th 30 graphic novels list is kind of the bastard stepchild of 101 graphic novels that we did for the website when everyone was stuck in 2020.
Is it fair though to compare a book that's written as a full graphic novel with just a collection of comics? Aren't they different animals?
Well, I don't know actually. See, these days when series are created, they are created with the aim of trades and hardcovers coming out. I mean, because to be honest, a lot of these companies, that the main money that they make comes from collections. So I think that because these are stories though. I mean, for example, Give Me Liberty, which was a 4-part comic story, but it was designed to be read as a whole. So I think that is. So I think it is a legitimate comparison.
We were talking earlier on about emerging into the mainstream. I wasn't quite sure where you stood. Do you mind that happened, or would you prefer Doctor Strange and Watchmen to have stayed, as it were, yours, and your community?
I don't mind. I mean, it's increased the audience for people. So I think that it would be a bit churlish. I think because probably more people have seen the magazine and the book because of things like this. So I to be honest, I kind of welcome it because I mean I sometimes worry it's a bit too ubiquitous, and the other problem is that with the dominance of comics, film, and TV, you sometimes wonder if there's just too much, and they're beginning to kind of scrape the bottom of the barrel with certain things that they option, and you worry that that people option things just because they're comic properties, not because they're worthwhile, not because it's a good property, not because it works, because there are certain things that work in comics that don't work in film and television. There are certain series that really utilize the strengths of comics, of the visual medium, of a print visual medium that can't be translated on the small or the big screen. So sometimes I do worry that they kind of they're picking these properties up purely because they're looking for space to fill in their vast streaming schedules.
And of course, you've got a piece on the TV shows in this book.
We have
as
well.
You don't do games.
No, we don't.
That interested
me.
We
would like to, but to be honest, it's only because we haven't found anybody to cover them properly. Because if we're going to cover them, we should do them properly. So so it's mainly just a practical consideration.
Tell me about the big changes in 30 years. In the stuff that you cover, we hinted at the beginning, but what? Give me an overview.
Well, the actual environment with which these things are published has changed dramatically in the last 30 years. So you've had the rise of independent comic publishers, people like Image, who we mentioned earlier, who do the Walking Dead and Saga, which is another big comic. And so in the old days, you'd have what you call the big two, which was Marvel and DC. But now these independent comic companies are selling, just as much as a Marvel or a DC book, and Marvel and DC are struggling. So they're trying to diversify their line.
And the power has shifted, hasn't it?
The power has shifted.
The
totally.
Creators have a lot more control. And
Image started in '92, pretty much the week it was announced. I think the week that we launched the magazine, and so they were former Marvel creators who left this big company to set up on their own, so that they, as you say, they would have their own kind of agency, their own freedom, and so that was the start. I guess that was the trigger, if you like. But there have been a lot of companies since, and there are these independent companies are able to kind of fight at the same level and to be at the same sales level as the former big two. So that's been a huge shift.
Now, when I was a kid, the market was me. Which was kids going into a comic book shop or a newsstand and buying the latest Fantastic Four or the latest Thor. Who buys these things now?
Well, I mean, it is a much older demographic mostly. I mean, you do get kids, buying certain things, but I think it's certainly less than it used to be. So it's probably like in the 20s and above, like mid-20s and up, who buy comics. I mean, you do get kids buying certain things. I mean, DC launched they have this young adult range of graphic novels featuring the characters aimed at a slightly younger audience. But I think the majority of these is an older audience.
I have to ask, why is it called Tripwire?
Because we didn't want to have the word comics in it. We wanted something that was kind of abstract and dramatic and memorable.
Well, it's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
As I say, I came to Tripwire quite recently, and it's a hugely useful resource online. But it's the book that really gets my juices going.
Yes.
It's called Tripwire 30.
Yes.
It's published by Heavy Metal.
Well, Heavy Metal in paperback, and there's a very limited edition hardcover, which people can get from ourselves direct or from a select few places.
But Amazon have got the paperback.
Yes, they have indeed.
For, I think it's £35.99.
Yes.
Well, jolly good. I loved it to bits.
Thank you.
Joel, thank you very much.
Tim, it's always my pleasure.
That was Books Podcast, presented by Tim Haig. Books Podcast is a Green Shoot production. You can find out more at www.green-shoot.com, and Tim can be contacted on tim@green-shoot.com.